Council.
I'm standing here, sir.
Okay.
You what? Ready, already ready? Okay, I call to order the adjourned regular meeting of the Palm Springs City Council for Thursday, July 20th, 2017. Would everyone please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? Please place your hands over your heart. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. You may be seated. City Clerk, could you do the roll call, please?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Councilmember Coors? Councilmember Mills? Councilmember Roberts?
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Fote?
Here.
Mayor Moon?
Here.
All present.
Thank you, Ms. Hart. Okay, now do we have a motion to accept the agenda as published?
So moved.
Motion has been made and seconded to accept the agenda. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Seeing none opposed, the agenda is accepted. Our first item of business is the presentation from Mark Rios, Rios Clemente Hale Studios on the downtown park, and I understand Mr. Rios has had to be out of town, so the presenter, would you like to come up and make your presentation?
Mayor, this is Nate Comier from Mark Rios. He'll be doing the presentation.
Hi, Mayor Moon, council, staff, public. Thanks for coming out tonight to learn more about the ongoing design development of Downtown Park. On behalf of Mark, I just want to say he sends his regards. He had a family affair to attend to, but he remains extremely passionate about this project. Unfortunately, we've all been working closely, and so I'm delighted to be here to both share the feedback that your very enthusiastic public gave to the previous design work and how that shaped the conceptual design that you're going to see tonight. Just want to remind everybody where we are in the process. This conceptual design process has sort of 3 passes. We were here most recently in, let's see, oops, sorry, get the laser going on here. We were here in May, and we shared 3 concept options. We were here last week to meet with your downtown subcommittee to get a preview of this draft design concept. And tonight, we'll be sharing the synthesis of all of the feedback on those design options and how that shaped a draft conceptual design going forward. And we'll be back in about a month to share a final design, which will form the basis of developing the design into construction documents. And if everything continues to go smoothly, we can lead to some construction next year. So I'm going to begin by recapping what we showed you last time and what the feedback that we received on that work was. We showed 3 concept options. The first one was called Common Ground, and its story was really rooted in Palm Springs as a place of coming together, a destination for gathering families and friends coming together. Its programmatic disposition was really about creating as much flexibility for large events as we possibly could. So there were large lawns and plazas in the center of the park. And its character was your more familiar or traditional park landscape of lawn and shade trees. The second option that we shared was called a healing oasis, and it really drew its story from the history of Palm Springs as a place all the way back to indigenous people, early settlers, the California nature boys, people seeking health and well-being here in Palm Springs. And its character had a more rustic, natural quality inspired by some of the natural landscapes that uniquely surround you. And programmatically, it sought to strike a balance between open, flexible areas and more intimate, shady places of respite, where you can get out of the sun, where you might dip your feet in the water, have a conversation. The third option that we shared was called Sculpture Park, and it took its cues from the history and contemporary role of art here in the desert. Of course, being in front of your art museum, adjacent, that was an important relationship, and the history and current events like Desert X, ways that people are using the landscape in an artful manner. And whereas the other ones had some of those large flexible areas that were flat and programmable, this one has more of a sculpted, faceted landform character that shaped more specific pathways through the landscape, and those pathways then framed processions and key views of art, architecture, and the mountains beyond. We were here, as I said, in May, just in one of the other conference rooms. We shared some fun exercises with you. We had people building their own parks, giving lots of feedback on different topics. And then we set up an online survey to make sure we captured the input, especially of folks who might not have been able to attend the public event. And the results were really stunning. In 2.5 weeks, we got almost 1,400 responses. And just to give you, someone to compete with, the last one of these that we did was for the city of Santa Monica for a large park there. And they only had 500 people bother to respond, and that's a city that really prides itself on its public participation. So yeah, you guys deserve a round of applause. It was outstanding. And of those 1,400 people, over half of them, in addition to answering specific questions about the story, the program, the character, wrote some up to essay-length narrative responses, very detailed about what they'd like to see in the park. And we read every single one of them, and they were really impressive. The geographic distribution of that feedback, it won't surprise you, mostly in the 6.2 and 6.4 Palm Springs and North Palm Springs core. But there were responses up and down the valley, and because you have some folks who spend some time here and some time elsewhere, there were other responses from around the country. And so to recap the feedback that we got, as I said, we asked specifically about those 3 topics. The first one being, what's the right story? Where should we draw inspiration for this park? And we got a lot of fun responses in person with you guys. Thank you. I see some of the same faces in the room. I'm really excited about that. And online, the most positive response was for this story of coming together, of a community coming together in this place, and all of the ways that's happened in the past and in contemporary ways, in festivals, and the role of creativity in bringing the community together was very strongly expressed. It doesn't mean that these other themes have to go away, but it gives us a strong indication of which should be the dominant storytelling vehicle. The second group of questions that we had related to programming. What do you really want to do and experience in the park? We had lots of great examples of the parks that people made themselves, and we studied those to look for relationships and configurations that we might not have thought of. And online, the overwhelming favorite, I call it the Goldilocks effect. Folks really wanted a balance. You could have all very flexible, but that leads to not enough of the more shady, intimate spaces, or you could go in the other direction and have all highly programmed and specific, and that doesn't give you enough flexibility for the diversity of events that you are planning to have in the park. And so again, we have pretty strong support for taking a middle ground approach of having some spaces that lawns and plazas, et cetera, that could have events on them, but then balancing that with the other kinds of spaces. And then finally, the third area of inquiry had to do with the character of the park. And in person, we got lots of dot exercise feedback on specific imagery that people reacted positively or negatively to. And online, the winner again was this Healing Oasis scheme, which really drew its character from the native landscapes that surround you. And so as we move forward, as I said, there was some really fantastic narrative as well, and I just wanted to share some of the ones that really moved us a great deal. In response to the Healing Oasis, they said the Healing Oasis captures the surrounding desert environment in a location right at the base of Mount San Jacinto. I think it is time to bring a little nature into Palm Springs. That was really powerful for us. And then in support of the common ground, that one about gathering, I very much like the idea of common ground as I see the park as building community. And so we, digested all of that and thought hard about how to start to bring the best aspects of those together. That's all extremely small, so you're not going to be able to read it. So you're just going to have to trust me on what it says. But what we did was we did an analysis of all those 700 responses to see what kinds of themes emerged, what were topics that people raised again and again and again. And so we just want to hit on some of the ones that showed up the most and the general tendency of what those comments were. The first two will be no surprise. They were water and shade. And these were people, over 100 of the 700, who specifically talked about those comforts that were necessary to make the park the kind of place that they would want to spend time in. The next level down, there were folks who, there's a Forever Maryland statue that we might talk about later today. We didn't really illustrate it very clearly in our options, so I would say the bulk of the responses, around 90 of them on this topic, were saying, where's Maryland? So that was important feedback for us. There were some people who were strongly opposed to that piece being incorporated in the park, but I would say the majority of this public feedback was supportive of its inclusion. The next one down is homelessness. Lots of examples of places that people felt the management and care and how we handle our homeless neighbors in our public open space needed to be dealt with better, and concern that this park, we have to make sure there's a lot of visibility, a lot of activation, and so forth to improve those conditions this time around. And also strong support for kids and families using the park. We didn't see a lot of people asking for a specific play structure in your kind of traditional park playground sense of kids and family, but a lot of ideas about being playful. If you're going to have a water feature, let's make sure it's something that people can really enjoy, not just look at. If you're going to have some landforms, let's make sure we can kind of climb up on them and use them in different ways. So that was important feedback. And then a whole series of things that weren't spoken to quite as much, but things like not smoking in the park, or making sure the lighting is high quality, and giving us some information on places that people really appreciated in the community, like the courtyard behind Coffee. It's really artistic and funky, and a number of people spoke to that as a good example in your community. And then folks just said, get it done, and give me this from this one and this from that one, start putting them together, and let's get moving. So without any further ado, we'll get right to doing that. So what we're going to do now is show you how we took that feedback and incorporated it into the design. And we were lucky, as we had sort of had all of those important ideas, our own design intuition, and all of the feedback from the public rattling around. We were fortunate to speak with some of your history buffs and learned that the site is, in fact, right on part of the grounds of the historic Desert Inn. And that led us to go back through our history books and read more and more about Nelly Kaufman, and really we came to the conclusion that our intuition, your feedback, and this kind of voice from the past, Nelly saying, she really espoused the space, stillness, solitude, and simplicity of Palm Springs. She called it the 4 S's, and that became a kind of touchstone for us as we made each design move. We said, are we true to that feedback we got, and to this kind of voice from the past that we think we really want to honor in the park? So let's do a little tour of the latest design concept. Many people are likely to be coming off Palm Canyon Drive. They'll come through the GRIT recent redevelopment work here on a palm-lined Main Street. And what I want you to imagine is looking up that Main Street to the Art Museum. In your foreground is going to be a grove of palm trees that harken back to the Indian canyons, some of the native tradition, as well as the agricultural traditions of the date palms in the entire valley. And so we feel like that mixed palm grove will be a way to speak to the larger landscape. And that'll be a foreground. You then see the Art Museum, and above all of that, rising over the whole park, will be the wonderful mountain range. You'll then be able to cross Bellardo Street, and the first element that will catch your attention is the Forever Marilyn statue. We are recommending that if she is to be included in the park, that she really belongs in, she kind of needs her own space, something equally tied to the park and to this new redevelopment along Bellardo. So it's kind of an expanded sidewalk plaza that with high visibility right for people coming into the park, where they can go wait in line in under the shady grove to experience that piece. Moving through the grove, I apologize, it's a little dim. You won't be able to see some of these things, but afterwards I'm going to have the boards up and I've got handouts for everybody if you'd like to look at it in more detail. But there's a nice gateway in the grove where we would like to reuse the original Desert Inn gates that apparently are somewhere here in town, and so we'd like to get a look at their condition if the council supports their inclusion, and look at how those could help form a really inviting gateway through the grove to the heart of the open space. And this is really something we think is going to be spectacular for the park. The two key elements of it are what we call the spring, which is going to be an interactive water feature, water coming out of a rock wall and mist rising up around boulders on the ground, and then a cloud canopy shade structure over an eco lawn, so families can be arrayed watching, let's say the kids are running into the water and back. This heart of the park on a day-to-day basis will be the real oasis of the oasis, where you can really cool off on a hot day. And then as you move beyond the heart of the park, that eco lawn expands out into a theater space. We've got a stage that's a small outcrop lifted up on one side, and then an amphitheater that rises up to a viewpoint on the backside. And what all of this landform is going to do for us is buffer the views of that parking structure. And as we did some viewshed analysis of the park, it was really exciting to see that the strongest way to appreciate the mountain range was really kind of on an oblique like this, over the art museum, over the Illuminaire house, which we'll talk about shortly, to see it on the bias. So you see a kind of layering of those foothills, and the light and shadow is really a strong effect. And so we want to draw people up that small hillside to view out over the park and to the larger mountain range. And then finally, of course, people can filter back and forth to the museum, and then to a corner that's dedicated to culture, beginning with the Illuminaire house and what we're calling an outdoor gallery. We'd like to see some programming in the park for art, and whether that's in partnership with the museum or other community partners, we think that's a fantastic opportunity. And we know that this adjacent hotel may take a while before that's built, and so that's another potential temporary space where art could be incorporated. What I'm going to do now is just move through 3 sections that give you a little more of an experiential view of those main areas of the park. This first one is a cut through the grove. You can see Maryland beyond on Bellardo. This is a mixed grove of fan palms and date palms, clusters of boulders, kind of seeps and vegetation with people sitting around it. Right there is the Desert Inn gates that you would move through. Again, inspired by some of those native landscapes. We're also going to look at whether we can use some of the misters, kind of like what you see at your restaurants and things around town, to make this not only a cooler, literally, grove, but really create a unique atmosphere that you haven't seen elsewhere in any other park. And of course, there'll be lots of comfortable seating for people to beat the heat in the shade there. So the second section is moving to the middle of the park, and this is where you can see now the parking structure. On your left, there's still Main Street. On the right, and this is the beginning of that landform, that outcrop, and this is our spring where the kids can play in the water, and this is that sloping lawn where you can watch and go back and forth and stay underneath this artful cloud canopy. we have an example of a Janet Eckelman piece here, but really this is a placeholder for now. We're going to explore whether it's, Bedouin tent canopies, is it net, is it, all sorts of ideas. We brought several years ago some really fun ideas of large flowers. We're going to really study lots of possibilities for that, but today we're really trying to identify the right location for that and the degree to which people agree that that's a high priority for the space. And then the third and final section is now through that event, theater, and outcrop. Again, you have the parking structure. This is that landform that has an amphitheater edge, and you can take the path to the top and get these tremendous views. This is the event lawn, our stage. This is the mini cloud. The cloud sort of a little wisp broke away from the big one to provide shade there at our stage. This is a sense of that kind of natural rock topography on the outcrop, some Palo Verdes and desert vegetation on there, and then people enjoying the events that are anticipated for the space. I should point out as well, I'm going to go back to the plan for a second, something I jumped over. We are hoping to incorporate a restroom in the park in order to reduce cost and reduce its footprint within this small space. Our suggestion is that that be incorporated inside the footprint of the existing city parking structure. We think that that's a way to get the cost down and really get it out of the way, but still allow a lot of visibility from that area to the rest of the park. And an additional consideration is potentially on the second level, being able to do some kind of a police kiosk or check-in point, just to give folks who are in the park the sense that there is some observation of the space. Jumping ahead. Sorry, second level of the parking structure. And here is, again, maybe it's just my eyesight, but it's a little dim. But so if the first structure we infill with the restrooms, higher up with therefore more visibility over the park would be the potential for some kind of a kiosk. And then there was that third view. And now I want to talk just a little bit about how this place serves those functions of coming together in lots of different ways. This is just at a high level the various program elements for the park. Forever Maryland Plaza, this kind of shade and respite, the water and play, the viewpoint, the events, the Luminaire House, this shade and outdoor gallery. And let's imagine it in some different scenarios. Let's go out there on a typical sunny, warm day, and you could imagine quite a few people trickling in from Palm Canyon Drive. First thing they see, of course, Maryland. They're drawn to go experience that. You have people filtering all through our this kind of sublime grove of mist and palms, and then lots of people hanging out on the eco lawn and under the shade canopy and back and forth enjoying the water feature. People going up to explore and get that fantastic view, maybe a few people playing on the lawn, trickling back and forth to the museum and the Luminaire House and any art exhibitions that are going on there. And now let's look at it at night. Let's say, I think I was talking with someone about a potential for a symphony under the stars. Let's say that's going down, or a movie night about modern architecture. All kinds of fun ideas we could do here. Lots of people in this case would now be using this event end of the park. It would still be illuminated sufficiently that people would feel safe trickling in from the parking garage or from Bilardo or Palm Canyon. But really the heart of the action is a community-scaled event, and we've suggested that could hold about 450 people. Certainly, depending on your feedback, we can push and pull all of these parameters, but that's the amount of space for kind of casual lawn chairs and picnic blankets and some people sitting along the back. And then let's bump it up. Let's imagine a much bigger event that is not only using the park, but we could close the adjacent streets and fill it with farmers market stalls or food trucks, or you could have music or a speaker on the stage and have people enjoying it from both sides. The idea here is we don't have to put all that hardscape in the park in order to achieve this scale of an event here in this community heart. By taking advantage of these adjacent streets, we can maximize as much of the park that has that day-to-day utility for comfort, and then still be able to flex to accommodate these. And then the last topic, which will preoccupy us a lot more as we go forward, is really, let's make sure we can deliver this with the available resources. And so we've been working with the Downtown Subcommittee, with our cost estimator, and we're confident that we can deliver what we're showing you tonight with the existing budget, construction budget of approximately $5 million. What that means is we have to be judicious about what our priorities are in the park, and it may mean that some other areas get you know, a little more extensive treatment in order to make sure we really knock it out of the park with the most important features. And so for our purposes, what we're proposing to you tonight is that this heart of the park, the shade, this artful shade canopy, and this spring water feature are really where the most intensive, will be the most resource-intensive portion of the park. When we show small dollar signs at some of our partner elements, the Illuminaire House and Forever Maryland, what that is signifying is those things are already going to be attractions in themselves. We think the appropriate response with the park around that is to be more low-key. It's a more simple, paved platform that Maryland might sit on, might be a lawn and some decomposed granite that surrounds the Illuminaire House. That's not a place where we want the park elements to be competing with those, and so those are indicated as being kind of the less spending there. And then we really want to have a high-quality paving, planting that pulls all these different elements together, and that's all of those areas where you see the kind of middle level of investment. And so once again, that's the draft concept plan that kind of takes all of your feedback, our design intuition, and also this incredible inspiration that we feel like is really coming to us from the site itself, this voice from the past for space, stillness, solitude, and simplicities. Nelly's 4 S's. We think the way we interpret those is natural materials, native plantings, and these creative comforts that are going to make it an oasis for your community going into the future. So with that, happy to take formal questions from Mayor, Council. And as I said, I'll be available in the back afterwards if folks want to go into more depth and able to see up close some of the plans and sections and so forth.
Okay, thank you for a very comprehensive presentation. And the agenda shows that we now have comments by the City Council, questions to the City Council, from the City Council, and then we'll have public comments, and at that time, any members of the public can speak for 2 minutes. If anyone's going to wish to speak, please put a card into the City Clerk, Ms. Hart. Okay, questions from the Council?
Councilman Mills and I were the subcommittee for this project, so I'd rather hear from you, as we've spent time and seen this preview already.
Wow.
Oh, really? You want us to comment first? Chris, you want to kick off and I'll join in?
No, I'm saying my comment is wow.
Oh, about this?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Oh, I thought she meant that JR didn't want to talk. That's wow.
Well, that's wow too, but.
And by the way, Ginny, that was my response as well. Wow. Yeah.
This I think is I did do the survey, and this captured not all of what I wanted, but it certainly did, because it captured the. I fell in love with this park in San Francisco. What is it, Palos Verdes?
Oh, by
Palisades?
Yerba Buena, near the RV.
Yerba Buena.
Yeah.
And was at a hotel that looked down on it. And I kind of got this feeling of people just going in and out of groves and walking, and then there was water features. And so when I'm seeing this is just absolutely spectacular. So let me ask you about those dollar signs. Because that's what we have to. So I got a little confused when you were talking as to what do you mean with that? Does that mean you're doing would be phased in?
No, let me clarify that.
Yeah, thank you.
We want to be very transparent about what we think is the most important thing to take to the highest level. And that's the ones with the $3 signs. And that means this central area of the spring water feature and the cloud canopy. And then there are areas where we are suggesting can get a more minimal treatment because there are other partnering elements that are coming potentially to the space that are going to get everybody's attention. So that, for example, we would not be trying to do artful benches and things around the Illuminaire house because they're there to see the Illuminaire house. So we think those are places where we'll say, okay, can we do maybe decomposed granite instead of, you know, our fanciest paving there? We're going to look for ways to be really calmer and less expensive in those areas.
Okay.
And then the medium level is really a high quality planting and paving that stitches all those together. But everything that we showed you is within the budget. There are things we didn't bring tonight that we've talked about with the committee and that we have in the back of our mind that we might at a later date say, do you want to tackle the street as well? Or things that could go further, but we want to be very careful to share with you and the public and staff something that's really aligned with the budget that you've articulated.
Well, one of the things that I really love too is the fact that the one thing I really disliked about the first plan was the fact that so much of the park was taken up by buildings, and by moving the restrooms and the police kiosk out, it gives so much more, because it's not a huge park. It's you know, it's a relatively small park. But it is spoken from somebody who came from New York, you know. But this is just really beautiful. So I want to thank the subcommittee. You've done some really excellent work. Thank you.
Yeah, he's not kidding. We pretty much just got out of the way. But Ginny, speaking quickly to the point about the removal of the buildings that were originally thought of for this area. I thought it was a mark of brilliance on their part to not only move them into the parking structure that already exists, but that this turned out to save a lot of money because that's a built building. So we already have much of what we need in there. It's really a matter of adding walls and finishing for you know, the codes and standards that are required, but it actually took a nice chunk of money out of cost.
You okay?
Well, we're going to talk also after public comment, or is this our discussion time?
Well, we can do whatever we
Which is
want.
more
We can talk
questions.
again afterwards.
Question?
Yeah. No, I don't have much to add. I actually think Mayor Pro Tem Fote really covered it. I think it's terrific. I like the blending of all the concepts. I think it came out really well, and I'm looking forward to hear what the public has to say. So thank you.
Yeah, I also like the design a great deal because one of my concerns watching this over the past couple of years, 4 years, was I wanted it to be really the people's park, the residents and the tourists, where they can go sit down somewhere and have a sandwich and play with their kids and just read a book, which I think you certainly accomplished. And also I like the water feature. That's going to be nice. And I'm not quite fully understanding how you're addressing the side of the parking garage. I see where you have areas rising up for amphitheater type thing. How will
So
You know
how's
all
that
that
treated?
dirt that's there now?
Yeah, I'm just going to push over.
yeah, I want to talk about that dirt. There is a ramp that currently goes down.
By the way, we can't see that screen you're pointing at over there, so
Adjacent to the parking structure.
we have it down here on these smaller screens.
Yeah. Can you hear me now? Okay. So right here is a ramp that goes down. And our suggestion is that be filled in so that you bring it up to grade, right? And then in addition to that, we want to slope this landform up from the parking structure to form this visual buffer and backdrop for the event space. So when you're in the park, you look right over that to the sky and the mountains beyond, and not stare at the side of the parking structure.
So how high would that go up?
Currently, we're showing it about 14 feet high.
Okay,
at
so
its
it would
highest.
close the opening portion, the bottom.
No. It's not going to be mashed up against it. That's why it's kind of so thick, is that it's got to slope up there's kind of a stem wall before it's open that's about 4 feet high. So if we wanted to, we could come up, start from about +4, and then at about a 3-to-1 slope gets us. We'll study it in 3 dimensions as the next pass at this, but our initial grading plan, we can get up with an accessible route to the top of that landform to about 14 feet.
Okay. The reason I'm asking, because in some earlier iterations, the last one, you were talking about some sort of mesh covering or a living wall or something to make that side of the garage less obvious.
In this case, we think this outcrop is going to perform a lot more for the park. It's both going to provide that visual buffer, and it's going to give you a destination where you get the best view of the surrounding landscape.
Okay.
And form a kind of amphitheater that supports the event use.
Okay, thank you. The other question I had was, what is the size of could you describe the stage that you have planned?
Yeah. I don't have a scale on this in detail, but this is about 20 by 40 approximately, and it's got a ramp to get up on top of it.
It's about, what, 20 by 40?
Yeah. Yeah, and we know there are folks that we need to talk to about who might actually program it and would have some input for us, so we can push and pull that around. Another element to keep in mind is there's a stair that goes down to the existing parking structure, so that's going to need to be accommodated as well. That's that.
Well, does this stage have a back to it, or is it just a flat space?
It's flat. It's got a kind of wisp of the cloud that has gone to provide shade over it. But if you were to do a movie in the park, you would bring and inflate or put up the screen for that.
Okay, I think this would be nice to have. I know Rancho Mirage just built something similar. Not that I go by their examples, but if it's a limited, the only concern I've always had is if there was temporary structures there for events, they could be based on the size of the event or what it was for. They could be small, they could be larger. Even the city has something that they can bring in there for like a band or a presentation. But if it's, what was your thinking on making a solid one that's a fixed size? It can't be expanded.
Well, 2 things. One, we wanted to get just like where you guys are right now, we wanted the performers for most events and for movies and things to be up high enough that everybody can see them. And if there's a larger group of performers, let's say it's a symphony type event, you could still put other performers in front of the stage. And we can study, maybe the stage needs to be bigger, but we think it's important for the functionality of that space that thing be lifted up. There's another issue is we're trying to put some trees in that outcrop as well, and because of the parking structure underneath, the only way to get any trees associated with that and a little bit more shade in that area is to provide some kind of planter elevation above the parking structure. So by lifting that up, we get kind of a mini outcrop in the family of the one on the other side of the event space and an elevated position for the performers relative to the audience.
Okay, and you have probably the most important building in the city right behind it. Are you looking at incorporating design elements from E. Stewart Williams building into this stage?
I would say that the materiality is more of a cue for us because we're very much trying to not only speak to the immediate surrounding architecture, but this kind of regional landscape. So I think there will be some opportunities to have some of the natural materials, but I think formally we're not going with quite as precise a geometry as you see with that work. Ours is obviously more organic and sort of a deeper history that we want to connect with in the character of the park.
And the overall budget, do you happen to know approximately what the cost of the stage portion is?
We haven't broken that out, but probably on the order of 100,000.
Okay.
When it's all said and done.
And one thing, Councilmember Coors and I talk about this occasionally on our subcommittee meetings, but this is going to be a really tight budget. I mean, do you have room? Do you have a little, I hate to use the word slop, do you have a little bit of flexibility to where, I mean, if you get any cost overruns, we're going to be in trouble.
We're carrying a 10% contingency.
Contingency, that's the word, yes.
But, it's very preliminary. Today, really, the conversation should be at this kind of big dollar signs, little dollar signs, but we will continue to work with your subcommittee, and as this gets refined, then we'll get down to choosing specific materials to support the values that you guys, send us off in support of.
Right. Of course, it's also important that the council halfway through doesn't change their minds and want to add something, right? Okay. All right. Any more questions before we open the public hearings? Councilmember Roberts?
Well, I just want to make two comments in the time that the subcommittee has had with this and has had a little more time to sort of understand it and think about it. The two things that I think impressed me the most about this were that, well, the level of work and the level of community input that clearly made it into the final design or to this level in the design. And I really see this park as an antidote to all of the steel and glass and concrete that is going up right now. And I think that this size park and this level of sort of natural displacement really balances what's going on down there, will really make a difference in how all of that feels. I also think it is a proper front yard, if you will, that the museum has deserved since it was built. And rather than looking across a parking lot, the museum will now look across something truly beautiful. And I think it will set off Stu Williams' architecture rather than hiding it away, which is sadly what it's always been. And the second thing that struck me about this was it takes, it's a real nod to our history. I loved the oasis aspect of it. I love that this has a true feeling with the grove of the Indian Canyon, so there's a nod to the real past of Palm Springs. I love the water elements. I just think it sort of brings together all of the things that we truly love about Palm Springs, and it brings them down to the street for everybody to enjoy at any age or any ability level. So again, my hat's off to you guys. I think you just did a terrific job. Now, my colleague may have different thoughts.
I've got some comments more towards the technical side, so I'm happy to wait till after public comments.
Okay.
But I certainly echo the job that has been done here. It's very different than where we started, but it's based on a different program as well. But I'm anxious to see, actually, to hear public comments, although I heard quite a few of them when the hands were clapping there. But I'm anxious to go on to the next step.
Thank you. So, no more questions right now. Then we will open public comment. Each person will have 2 minutes to speak. First speaker is Adam Texeria, I think. Then Robert Stone, and then Frank Tyson, and then Elizabeth Armstrong.
Thank you, Mayor Moon and City Council. I believe this is a great alternative to the concrete we see in the downtown area, and I like the idea about the kiosk. We may not know about the Desert Inn as many tourists may have seen, but this is a better alternative to inform them about the past and to what we value the most historically in the city. I also like the canopy because you can sit down in a shaded area and then go find some water to go rinse off in and then go back to cool off. It is a great size, and I believe this is headed in the right direction to what the city needs. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Robert Stone, followed by Frank Tyson, and then Elizabeth Armstrong.
Mayor Moon, council members, my name is Robert Stone. I did take the survey. I have to confess I have not been following this project very closely, and the reason I haven't been following it very closely is because you hired Mark Rios. If you want to get the best design, you have to hire the best people, and you couldn't have made a better choice in selecting this firm for this project. I think the museum may have had something to do with that, and I want to thank them. I know many museum members are here if that's the case. Jenny mentioned Yerba Buena Park in San Francisco, and I was there when that park was installed, and I just wanted to share something that might be helpful. All of that landscaping in Yerba Buena Park, the trees, the lawn, is also installed over a garage. And what is beneath, it's actually a very shallow bed of dirt, but what's beneath it is these enormous blocks of foam core, which weigh almost nothing. And they did that for the same reason that we're looking at weight issues with planting. So that's an option that I hope that Mark Rios is aware of and something you might consider. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stone. Next, Frank Tyson, and then Elizabeth Armstrong, and then Todd Hayes.
I remember a few years ago when this plan was before us, and it was awful. There were all these buildings on it. It was terrible. And this is a wonderful departure from what we originally were. We've come a long way in the right direction. There's only one. You always have to have ideas for the future. There's one thing I think this community ultimately. Can you hear me? No, speak up. Yeah. I think this is a very positive way we have arrived at a park without a lot of buildings like we had before. There's one thing that I like to think of and dream of for the future, and maybe that will happen for the community. I think the other side of Main Street, which is a bad name, by the way, it should be Arch Street or something like that, should also eventually be part of the park. We don't need another hotel there. We got enough hotels right now.
Frank, could you repeat all that? I don't think I've ever heard you use those words before.
I'm very positive. I thank you.
And by the way, it's not called Main Street. That street has been officially named. Is it Museum Drive or Museum Way? I forget.
Museum Way.
Museum
That
Way,
makes
which
more
meets
sense,
Museum Drive in front of the museum.
Okay.
Yeah, we did that while Councilmember Mills was out of town, remember? Yeah. Elizabeth Armstrong will be our next speaker, followed by Todd Hayes, and then Brooke Hodge.
Thank you so much, and good evening, the council, the mayor, and all the culturally engaged residents here tonight. I'm Liz Armstrong, the executive director of the Palm Springs Art Museum, and I also want to say, wow. I'm here today with a lot of members of our staff who, like so many of you, have been watching with some caution and concern the evolution of this park, and we are super jazzed. You know, parks have become a major part of our culture today, and we're so pleased that Rios Clemente Hale is working on this project because their track record of creating community-based parks is remarkable, and their sensitivity to cultural heritage and native landscaping are just two of the reasons why we couldn't be happier. And we had high hopes for this park, but it has gone beyond our expectations based on what we just saw. Likewise, we've been impressed with the team's process. So I just want to say, you know, and remind everyone that's included public study sessions, an online survey, public comments, and the collaborative input from this community. I think it bodes well for future city projects, and it's clearly reflected in the designs we just saw. And finally, I want to say that the park, as others have said, it truly integrates the architecture of the museum and it as a presence with the city and with the mountain landscapes, which is going to bring a very dynamic sense of history and place to our downtown. We're simply very excited about how the Rios design has the potential to transform the life of the city with a gathering place that is both our central park and our front yard. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Armstrong. Next speaker, Todd Hayes, followed by Brooke Hodge, and then Judy Deertrack.
Todd Hayes, Mayor and Council, thank you, Mayor, very much for the opportunity for us to participate in this process. And I am a member of the HSPB, just as a matter of record, but I am speaking here on behalf of myself as a resident of the city of Palm Springs. I am incredibly happy to see the evolution of this plan and this process. This is a really inspired design for this park. I'd like to speak on two elements in particular. This is the site of the original Desert Inn, and seeing the way that this new design does now incorporate the gates from the Desert Inn is probably one of the most important elements and changes, and I wholly support and hope that you would support the incorporation of the Desert Inn gates. It's a wonderful change, and it's a very important change. I also am happy that obviously the Luminaire House is still a part of this park. I also like the way that the context of the landscaping seems to be inspired a little bit more on the original plan for the Illuminaire house. There is a pass-through driveway, which is a part of that structure, and it looks like the design of that landscape does at least imply to some extent that there was a driveway that passed through that house. So I think that's a very important element. And the last thing is, this is Nelly Kaufman's dream site, and so if there is any way to call this Kaufman Park or use her name in this park, I think that would also be a really nice nod to her, and thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hayes. Next speaker, Brooke Hodge, followed by Judy Deertrack, and then Dino Sonic. Hi.
Hi, thank you, Mayor Moon and City Council members. I'm Brooke Hodge, Director of Architecture and Design at the Palm Springs Art Museum. And I'd like to thank Mark Rios and Nate Cormier and the rest of the team for really beautifully synthesizing all of the public comments that they carefully studied and creating this beautiful hybrid design between the two of the initial design concepts. I'd also like to thank the city for involving the public in the process through meetings like this and through the survey, and also for allowing us at the Art Museum at our Architecture and Design Center to be able to present the design concepts, the survey results, and to also elicit public comments through our new summer lab, or SLAB, which is in the Architecture and Design Center through August 6th. And we're open every day except Wednesday, and our hours can be found on our website. So I hope we'll be able to put this new hybrid design concept on view after this meeting, and the public has a chance to really get up close and study the design concepts and leave more comments. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Ms. Hodge. Next is Judy Deertrack, followed by Dino Zonic, and then Michael Hirschbein.
Good afternoon. My name is Judy Deertrack. I'm also a candidate for City Council. And I really want to thank the City Council for this, and certainly the two members of the subcommittee. There has been a lot of hard work on this. To Mr. Mark Rios and his team, extraordinary. And this is a point of celebration. Even though this may be one small lot, it became the focal point for the city to express its vision for what it feels in terms of scale, in terms of character, in terms of design, art, nature, and history, that all of those elements are still at the top of the pile. And that any design, any build out in the city is expected to conform to it and integrate it properly. And this is what I see with respect to the park. It's become a place of real celebration, a real place of success where that's been well on its way to being implemented. So bravo to everybody involved. The other thing I want to bring up is the financing, because I know the city has talked recently about austerity measures, about concern on uncovered health care liabilities, the possibility of raising the sales tax another 0.5%. And we have, clearly there is financial pressure on this and whether we have adequate money. I've not heard anything tonight on annual operations and maintenance for the park, but that's also a concern. And next week you have something, I believe, still on calendar on the Virgin Hotel, where you have another potential $50 million subsidy, and you must have negotiating power on that. And although I do not support those subsidies, if you do go ahead with it, for Pete's sake, why is Mr. Westman getting all of the benefit off of these lots, and we are taking on all the liabilities? And I'm asking you to see if you can negotiate on that.
Thank you, Mr. Trek. Next is Dino Zonic.
Thank you.
And then Michael Hirschbein, and then Philip Smithall.
Maestro.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I really congratulate you for such extraordinary endeavor. I'm very proud that Palm Springs will have a final opportunity to get something like that. However, in my immediate reaction is the two concerns to address and to be considered seriously, because I think this is the historic moment for Palm Springs to get home for music. As we see that visual art is support everywhere, we're really, really lacking to have music venue. As a person who has extraordinary experience organizing local, national, and international festivals and performing, for me, even just for medium-sized orchestra, I need a 60 by 40 stage. For 450 people in audience, with all due respect, I have that in private cocktail parties. But when you get orchestra out, this is the fantastic opportunity for us to set up the festivals. To organize festival of music in the Palm Springs, we need to really, really get support to get our home. Every time when I start talking about Palm Springs Orchestra, they are asking us, where are you going to perform? And this is the real moment. I know there is lacking of space. I know there is so much to be considered, but this is also how I see it, hard, a breaking moment for us to get out and have a finally venue to present this city as one of the greatest. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Sonic. Next is Michael Hirschbein, then followed by Philip Smithhill, and then Les Young.
Thank you. I too agree this project is 100% on track for a great space. I want to talk about the space around it for a minute, because I think that's going to be as determinant as to the success or failure of this project as the space itself. Sidney Williams sponsored a seminar a couple of years ago during Modernism Week that brought in some experts that talked about the edge around these public spaces, and they talked about doorknobs, meaning what are the activities along the edge of the space. We only have two edges left. We have the edge that was going to be the hotel to the south, and then the edge that will be the new hotel. So as we go forward looking at those two projects, I think we have to take special consideration as to what the functions on the ground floor of those spaces or of those buildings are going to be, and that they contribute to the life of what we're going to be building here. There's examples of projects that are just wonderful that died because they didn't have the proper edge condition. Piazza d'Italia in New Orleans is really the progenitor of what is going on here, but unfortunately nothing got built around the edge conducive to the public space that was being built, so it was not successful. And if you look at Yerba Buena Gardens, there's lots of activity around it that generates the activity for that space as well. So just the message is, going forward, we need to be really careful about what we approve facing the park, both to the south and to the east. So I just want to make sure we do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hirschbein. Philip Smithhill, and then Les Young, and then Sid Craig.
Philip Smith III, just to clarify. But
so it looked like Smith Hill. Sorry.
It's all right. It's all right. Good evening, Mayor and council members. First of all, thank you for making this process possible. As somebody who went to art and design school and that grew up here in the Valley, it is really exciting to see that Rios Clemente Hale is part of this project and that you've allowed that to happen. So first of all, thank you there. I'm an artist that is based here locally. I was part of Desert X. I've done a lot of large-scale public art projects across the country. I'm actually working with Rios Clemente Hale on a public art piece for West Hollywood Park. They've been such a joy to work with. Part of my concern with the project, ultimately, really, truly my only concern would be the Maryland sculpture. I am concerned when I see the elevations of the park, and you sort of see this figure sort of, you know, on a 20% opacity in the background, sort of there. And my concern is that downtown park will be called Maryland Park. I really enjoy the image of the Janet Eckelman, the net structure. She's an incredible artist. If only the funds for Maryland could be dedicated to a Janet Eckelman piece, that would be something that would draw the crowds, the same kind of Instagram, Facebook quality that that project has. But I think somebody with a right kind of name and also the right kind of elegance, really, that I think this design is bringing to downtown. So I would just love for the public art element, which I think is more dominant in this design than you may think, for that to be at the same level of the design itself. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Les Young is next, followed by Sid Craig, and that Sid Craig is our last speaker, unless someone turns in another card.
Thank you. My name is Les Young, and I am a member of the Parks and Recs Commission and the Vice Chair. I am here today to speak on my behalf, and it is to say thank you, thank you, thank you. I think that design is perfect. The work that you've done is phenomenal, and the way that you did it is outstanding. You've engaged, I think it was 1,400 plus people in the design. You actually invited many, many more, and I wish they would have participated. They didn't, so there will be people that will complain at some point in time, but if they didn't give you feedback, they missed the boat. This design, the theater seating, looking at the museum and the hill, the mountain is just, it's breathtaking. The concept of water, along with the greenery, and hopefully we are able to do this cloud structure, it just is, it sounds dreamy. I can't wait to get to that park and have a glass of wine with others and just enjoy the heck out of it. So thank you for what you are doing with this. It is phenomenal. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Sid Craig?
I wanted to speak as first as an individual, as a citizen in this community, how proud I am of what you've created for us today. The second thing, I'm the chairman of Parks and Recreation, and the proudest thing to us is the community involvement in this project. And this is different from other cities here in the country, other cities. I lived in Los Angeles, and this is unique when you see the things that were brought to us, when we were all invited to come and look, to put our dots, our lines, our comments. This to me is special, and that's what makes this city different from other cities. This park, I think, is beautiful, the design of it, the well-thoughtness, and I just think it takes in everything. Former council member Paul Lewin was talking about this years ago, how we felt we needed the shade, the structure, the density. I think all of this was created in this, and I'm very proud to be part of all of it, and I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Craig. Ms. Hart, we have no further speakers?
No others.
Okay, seeing no further speakers, we will close public comment, and I'd like to thank all of you for coming down here and giving us your comments today. Mayor Pro Tem?
I just have one question. I think that maybe the maestro might have misunderstood. Were you saying the 480, that what I heard you say is like with picnic seating and all of that, if we were actually having a concert or a symphony, as the maestro would like to have there, what would our seating capacity be?
We'll go and look at that in detail, and we can reach out to the symphony and talk about the specific parameters, both from the performer side and the audience side, and look at wood rows of folding chairs, how many can we get in there, and we'll check in with your downtown subcommittee as well and talk about balancing all of those needs.
That would be great, because I mean, I could just imagine that as being that kind of a summer a fall concert, not summer, but a fall concert of going out there, and sitting. But anyway, thank you.
Yeah, just want to assure you, it's not a fixed design. It's that's the kind of input we need to refine the program and the spaces.
Councilmember Mills, did you have more comments?
Yes, I have a couple of questions on the plan itself, Jason. Can you come up to the mic?
Can we put the plan up again?
Sure. Oh. Did you guys catch that? Okay. No worries.
On the north side of the site, where the parking structure is, there's currently a projection that defines the entry out of the parking garage at all 3 levels. Or,
an opening, you mean?
Yeah,
Yes,
the opening,
that's right.
and that's basically at grade level when that comes out.
The opening starts from about 4 feet up, where the wall exists. So from about here to about here, there's kind of a 4-foot high wall, and then there is a point where it drops and you can actually walk across.
Correct.
Or are you talking about the overhead projection?
No. I'm talking about at grade level.
Yeah.
So that is that's an existing opening allowing people to within the structure to come out into the park. Yet you don't look like you're using that. And not that I'm just making the comment that that's something that needs to be addressed. In addition, that's a full stair, and it might be a required exit, and it might not. I don't know. But there's also an elevator plan for that location, and so that is something that I wish you'd take a look at and see how that fits in, because I think an elevator. There's currently no elevator in the parking structure, and I think that's probably something that we need to address. And as I said, the substructure for the elevator is there. So if you could take a look at that and how, maybe something else could work into that area as well. But I think it's. I don't think it's something that can necessarily be chopped off, but if you would mind in the next step,
and if you can help us track down any of that existing documentation.
Okay.
We
The other thing is, and you talked about, like, for a movie night there might be a portable screen, et cetera. And they're probably, in the design, I think you're probably looking at other portable things. So, but I don't see any storage. And so I think, as much as I don't want to see, a storage building, I think it's something that we need to think in terms of.
I think you know where we'll want to put it, right?
Yeah, I know where you want to put it. But that's certainly feasible. But I think it's a component that we don't want to forget. The other thing, and I mentioned it to you when we had the subcommittee meeting. I mean, I like everything. I like the up and down. I like the amphitheater concept with the ramp up. I like the 14 feet. But what I don't like is the distance between the amphitheater and the existing parking garage, because it's really hidden. It's an area that needs to be visually supervised by just activity, just people around it having vision into it. So if you would take a look at that and see what we can do to it. I know we talked about some things that might happen, but I want to reiterate what everyone else has seen, and it is I don't want to say it's a great start, because it's more than a start. And so I'm looking forward to the next layer of refinement, and I'm hoping the rest of the council agrees, and that we give you some marching orders to get going on the next level.
Can I ask that question? What are we? Or maybe it's a subcommittee. What is the timeline on this?
My understanding that you'll be back in another month. Is that correct?
With
4 weeks?
the final concept.
Yeah.
And that sort of wraps the current effort. And I think then we'll look to you. We would like to keep rolling right into schematic design. We need surveys and other consultants, and talk about acoustics and civil and all those fun things. Ideally, we're working all that through the winter, and so that you can get started on construction next year.
Councilman Roberts.
I just want to say I heard a lot of good comments tonight, and I don't know if you were taking notes, but I was. And I think that there's some things, and hopefully you stored these away in your head at least, but I think the one concept about perimeter connections is very, very important. We have Michael Braun here in the audience tonight, who heads up Grit Development, formerly of Westman Development. And, sooner than later, perhaps a meeting with Mr. Braun. Chris Mills and I are also on the subcommittee for not only the downtown development, but the landscape for the downtown development. So perhaps you should be a part of that meeting as well. Mr. Braun should have some input on this as well. Questions about the stage. I don't know how you normally handle that, but obviously that's something that we really need to consider, and maybe get some professional consultation on that, and for the potential types of uses, and obviously scale it to those uses. I think overall where you've placed it and the flexibility of using all sides of it is a great start, but I think we need to be more focused on how we'll use it at this point, get into the nuts and bolts and the logistics of that. With respect to public furniture, we haven't really talked about that. I know that that's sort of the jewelry on the park, so to speak, and that will probably be a conversation that'll come in the next round. So somebody had mentioned that to me. Public art is obviously going to be a big part of this, and I can assure you that Ann Sheffer, the head of our Arts Commission, is chomping at the bit to get involved with this and get the Arts Commission involved, and that's something that should happen sooner than later. Obviously, the Art Museum will play a big role in this, and we should start that conversation sooner than later. And last but not least, I think we have many opportunities here to finish what you started, which is to honor our past and to honor all sides of our past. I think it's always been considered that there would be a special acknowledgement to Nelly Kaufman and the Desert Inn and the past of this site. Obviously, we have some artifacts that are planned to come back, but I'm hoping that the HSPB will be involved with this as well to talk about ways we can honor Nelly, and whether that is, I know we've talked about different ideas, but maybe those should start to gel as well. Obviously, having the gates there is a great start and will be really exciting to people as well. And with that, again, thank you. I can't wait to see your next iteration on this.
Mr. Mayor, I'm assuming that is the direction of the council, and we can.
Yes, and I'm interested to see, Chris, I'm interested to see particularly what you brought up about those steps. You're talking about those steps that go off the top and then sort of in now? Yeah. Yeah, that, see how that's in. I've been wondering what's going to happen with that. So to see how that could be integrated in would be very interesting.
All right. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Just let the public know we'll be at the back if you want to look at stuff up close and ask any more questions.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, we will take a 15-minute, everybody finished with this? Everybody finished? David?
Yes.
Okay, we'll take a 15-minute recess, and we will restart here at 7:40, please. television. Okay, this will be a review of the recommendations of the ad hoc planned development district subcommittee regarding modifications to the PDD process. Staff report, please.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, members of the Planning Commission, thank you very much. If I could have the PowerPoint up on the screen, please. Let me give you a little bit of background on what we're discussing tonight and what the ad hoc PDD committee is. Just starting off, the ad hoc PDD, and I'm sorry I used the acronym PDD, that's Planned Development District. The ad hoc PDD committee was formed as the result of a lawsuit or a settlement agreement that the city entered into relative to the Dakota project. You have a copy of that settlement agreement included in your backup materials as attachment number 3, but it outlines the formation of this citizen committee and gives specific responsibilities to them. The purpose of the committee was to study our existing planned development district process and then to make recommendations regarding modifications to the process. The recommendations per the settlement agreement were to be non-binding, but as you'll see from the recommendations, I think there's a lot of really helpful and useful things that the city could do to improve its processes. In the settlement agreement, it states that the recommendations of this ad hoc committee are to be forwarded to the Planning Commission and that the Planning Commission is to consider those recommendations in good faith. The Planning Commission is then to forward the recommendations to the City Council for consideration. And so that's why we're here this evening. The Planning Commission did consider the recommendations of the ad hoc committee over the series of 3 meetings. They first reviewed them at a regular Planning Commission meeting in April. They had a study session later that month to go through the recommendations, and then they finalized their recommendations to you at their first meeting in May of this year. In terms of the ad hoc committee, as I had mentioned, it was a citizen committee, and the settlement agreement specified the base members of the committee. The first was Mr. Jim Harlan, representing the People for Proper Planning, and I believe I saw Jim here. They're right there. Jim, thank you. We also had Mr. Marvin Roos, who was appointed to represent the developer, and Marvin is here with us. And then Kathy Wehrmuck was appointed to represent the Planning Commission as part of this committee. The committee was also given the ability to choose up to 4 additional members, which they did. They chose the following individuals: Mr. Scott Bigby, who is here with us tonight, Mr. Lynn Callardine, who is also a member of the Planning Commission, Ms. Tracy Conrad, who unfortunately could not be here this evening, and then Mr. Michael Johnston, who is also with us this evening. I would like to say thank you to the members of the ad hoc committee. They served for a period of 9 months in going through our ordinance and formulating recommendations. And again, I would like to commend them for their time and efforts in putting together these recommendations that you have before you this evening.
Thank you.
As I had mentioned, the committee met over a period of 9 months. They held 15 meetings between July of 2016 and March of 2017. The meetings were opened up to members of the public who attended those meetings and offered public comment. In fact, the bulk of the backup materials that you have in your package this evening are public comment letters, things that were reviewed with the committee members and presented to them at the meetings. As part of their process, the committee started off by identifying issues and concerns with our current Planned Development District ordinance. So they spent several meetings discussing that and putting together a list of concerns. Following that, they spent several meetings reviewing best practices as it comes to planned development districts. So they looked at ordinances from other cities within the state of California and from across the country. They also looked at materials from the American Planning Association relative to planned development district practices and ordinances. And then finally, over the last series of meetings, they put together their list of recommendations and refined that list. The recommendations are included as an attachment to your backup materials here. You'll find that there's a total of 67 recommendations forwarded from the committee. These recommendations fall into 4 areas, and this might serve as a good basis for your discussion this evening. First of all, the recommendations talk about changes to our existing PDD ordinance, and those would be the recommendations number 1 through number 25. Secondly, they talk about changes to how we process planned development district applications, and those would be recommendations number 26 through 38. And then next, they talk about changes to the general plan, and that would be recommendations 39 to 51. And then finally, any associated changes to our zoning code, which would be recommendations number 52 to number 67. So there's a lot of information in those recommendations. The recommendation sheet that you have in your package looks like this. The column on the left is the recommendation as it came from the Ad Hoc Plan Development District Committee. One of the things the settlement agreement talks about is that all of the recommendations should be forwarded to the Planning Commission, even if there is dissent. And so the middle column is for any dissenting opinion from that recommendation with the initials of the committee member who was the dissenting opinion. What you will find for the most part is that there is an incredible amount of agreement between the committee members in terms of the recommendations themselves. The final column, the column to the right, and any text that you see in red are the recommendations from the Planning Commission as they reviewed those recommendations over the course of 3 meetings. So what we tried to do is we tried to keep the recommendations from the committee in their format as originally intended, and then the comments from the Planning Commission are kept to the right or shown in red so that you can clearly see the recommendations of the committee versus the recommendations from the Planning Commission. Again, there is a lot of information to consider here this evening in terms of the recommendations. And so what I would offer to you is that tonight you are having a joint meeting with the Planning Commission. This gives you the opportunity to review and discuss the recommendations. If you have questions in terms of the Planning Commission's comments, they are here to address those. What this will probably result in is that we're not expecting you to take action on this evening. And so what you might choose to do is to continue this discussion at a future city council meeting. You may wish to have a study session, or you may wish to refer this to your city council subcommittee to discuss these recommendations further and come back to you. So I just want to put that out there, that in terms of your discussion tonight, again, we aren't expecting you to finalize your recommendations tonight, but we are looking for direction from the City Council in terms of what our next steps with these recommendations should be. So with that, that concludes my presentation to you. I would like to keep the PowerPoint up here, so as we begin the discussion with the Planning Commission, again, I talked about going through the 4 different areas of the recommendations. This would be a good format for your discussion. And with that, I will conclude my presentation to you. Be happy to answer any questions. You also do have public comment here before you begin your discussion.
Thank you, Director Fegg, and thank you for all your work helping them through this over the past 9 months. I know you were incredibly valuable to them with this. Mayor Pro Tem?
Flynn, can I just have a little clarification on the changes and how that would be done? Like, for instance, on the changes to the general plan, would we wait on that until the general plan revisions, or the zoning changes? I mean, how? Because I noticed that there's a lot of things in here I'd almost like to have had yesterday in the PDDs, and so can you give me a little hint as to how these changes would be made?
Certainly. One of the things that we discussed at the Planning Commission was the need to develop a work plan. If City Council chooses to implement these recommendations, then the responsibility of staff would be to come back to you with a work plan in terms of how we get that done. Now, some of these are going to be simple changes to our zoning code or relatively minor changes to the general plan itself. Those can be processed by staff through our regular public hearing process, and we can get those done. Other things, for example, there's a recommendation from the Ad Hoc Committee about updating the general plan. Obviously, that's going to be a much longer process. What we would need to do is to hire a consultant to assist us with that process. But again, Mayor Pro Tem, I think what we would need to do is once City Council decides on the recommendations that you wish to implement, staff would come back to you with a work plan in terms of how we get that done and when we get that done.
Thank you.
Any other questions to staff before we open public comments? Yes, Councilmember Roberts.
You know, Flynn, as I look at this, and I have to say that I'm really excited that we're looking at this. This is long in coming, and I think I want to confirm what the mayor said, and I just think the amount of work that went into this by the subcommittee, by the Planning Commission, and by your staff is clear. And I'm truly impressed with this. And I'm excited because I know that this is going to have or make a significant difference in the way these PDDs are used and on the overall and long-term effect on our city. And my question, the only thing I'm not clear on is, I know you gave us some options on how we can move forward, but there's a lot in this that is what I might call low-hanging fruit. Just a lot of easy adoption, just good ideas, common sense, things that instantly would make a difference in how we handle PDDs. One of the problems, at least when I was on the Planning Commission and now on the City Council, was that it got fuzzy in the way that people justified the use of a PDD. And I understand the reasons it got that way, and a lot of it can have to do with where we are in the economy and what the desires are of the city and how we're growing and the demographic and how we're growing. And so there's some of this that is just clean and simple. I'm really thrilled about project justification. And it seems to me it's so much of that is simply going to go into a new form or kit that will be a requirement to anybody applying for a PDD. And then, of course, that information can then be used and be less fuzzy in the decision making. In other words, if they haven't met that criteria that you've created, they simply don't make it to the second gate. Or when I say second gate, they don't make it onto the Planning Commission. It can almost be denied at the staff level. But I guess what I'm trying to understand is so much of this to me is acceptable in the form that they've brought. The other areas obviously would need a lot of work because they're looking for new standards. They're looking for whole new ways of well, basically standards, we'll call it that. So would the right way or one way to go about this would be that if there's some of this stuff that is just straight and clear, we can almost adopt it and agree to it now. Then would we send some of this back to the Planning Commission or the subcommittee to help us fill out the standards that they are requesting, or send it back to your staff, and would you make those recommendations? So I guess I'm getting more into the logistics of it after we comment on it.
Mm-hmm. And again, that goes back to the idea of work plan, as Mayor Pro Tem was indicating. Low-hanging fruit, things that don't involve changes to the code, but rather changes to the way that we process things administratively. Again, those can be implemented right away. There's also some very minor changes to the zoning code that could take effect in terms of going through the standard process for a zoning text amendment. And so that would typically be the process. Once you all decide on which recommendations you want to implement, those that are just simply a change to our zoning code, we take it through the standard process of staff develops the language, we present it to the Planning Commission makes a recommendation, and then it comes to the City Council for adoption, or if you wish to make changes, etc. So we'll follow the standard processes in terms of how these things come up to you all to approve.
Okay, I still don't see a direct path yet. I see more conceptual there, but we can come at that a little later.
Okay, any other questions of staff before we open public comments? Just on a process, City Clerk, it's not on my agenda, but should we do, just to be process pure, should we do a roll call of the Planning Commission since they've joined us in this meeting?
Yes, we should.
Okay.
Commissioner Donofield?
Present.
Commissioner Hirschbein?
Present.
Commissioner Milton?
Present.
Commissioner Lowe?
Present.
Vice Chair Calderon?
Calderon, yep, present.
Chair Wormack?
Present.
Okay.
We have 6 present.
Thank you, City Clerk. Okay, the next item we will open for public comments, and each member of the public who wishes to speak on this, if you haven't turned a card in to the City Clerk, please do so. Each member of the public will have 2 minutes to speak, and there will be a timer, so please time yourself properly. First speaker is Robert Stone, followed by Frank Tyson, and then Judy Deertrack.
Mayor Moon, council members, thank you. I sat in on about half of this subcommittee's meetings, and I want to tell you they worked so hard and so diligently for no money, long hours, and they all came from very different backgrounds, but over the 9 months there was a remarkable consensus and unanimity to their conclusions. As Council Member Mills mentioned just a couple of weeks ago in a discussion, well, the PDD waives everything, and that is exactly what the PDD has been doing in our town for about 10 years at least, 10 years that I've been following it. And that has been the crux of the problem. I am a licensed real estate broker. I've been a licensee for 25 years. I understand the concept of highest and best use, and I hope that is a term that never comes out of the mouth of a mayor or council member, because it is a real estate term that describes the obligation of the owner of a parcel to maximize the profit that they are going to acquire from developing it. And when you waive all of the rules and you invite people in to do projects, they're going to do a project that gives them the most return on the dollar. This is problematic because it hasn't been following our zoning code or our general plan, and so we get these, what I've referred to as mini Santa Claritas, plopped down all over town that don't resemble any of our existing streetscape or our built environment. I think that we need to do exactly what the Commission has recommended. We need to look at Judy Deertrack's longitudinal study of 10 years of PDDs and how they reflect or don't reflect our general plan. And we also need to move to a place where hopefully we can stop lawsuits against projects, because only the attorneys win in those lawsuits, and they win every time. But if we do a little better job of following our own general plan, hopefully we can cut down on that, if not eliminate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stone. Next speaker is Frank Tyson. Frank, make sure you speak into the microphone.
Yeah. Is this okay now?
Yeah.
Okay. I would like to, there are many people in town that still don't know what a PDD is. And I just want to spend a minute or so to tell people how to recognize a PDD. If the project is right up to the street, it's a PDD. If a project is too dense, it's a PDD. If a project has too little open space, it's a PDD. If a project is too tall, it's a PDD. 90% of our project have been PDDs. We almost have had a shingle out. Developers come in and do whatever you want. So I'm so encouraged that we finally have a chance to go back to our adherence to the general plan and adherence to our zoning ordinances. And there's also a little benefit to you. Your meetings should not go beyond midnight, because if people follow the zoning ordinance, the general plan, they don't have to spend all that time on each PDD. I am very thankful for the work that the Ad Hoc Committee did. I attended most of all of them, I think, the meetings, and I'm thankful to the Planning Commission, and I'm also thankful for Judy Deertrack, who studied practically every PDD for the last 10 years. And it's been a horrendous amount of work, and I recommend that you look at her study, because you can see for yourself in the aerial plans how much cement and concrete each PDD has. There's one problem still that is a problem, and that's there are a lot of old PDDs that are still in the pipeline. And for instance, one of them, the Cameron project, was approved 11 years ago. And you know, that should have been totally reviewed, and so are many. The Vibe project that Ginny Foat critiqued very nicely, but wasn't paid attention to, also is another example. And I think we need to really also now look at all the old PDDs
Frank,
and take a good look at them. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Next speaker is Judy Deertrack, followed by Marvin Roos.
I assume I have a 2-minute speaking time?
Yes.
Good evening to the City Council and the Planning Commission, and I again also want to really express my gratitude to the PDD Study Committee for the long months of hard work, but I also want to acknowledge the incredible role of People for Proper Planning, because this was a settlement agreement and a study that was initiated only from the hard work of people for proper planning. With respect to the outcome of the study, I spent almost 2,000 hours because the city has no tracking system with respect to gathering information on a permit history for development of a lot. And on a lot of these PDDs, there were extensive modifications over time. And it was very difficult to track back and see what the planning standards should be from one modification to the next. And I believe you need to give a lot of attention to that in terms of how you propose to handle the PDDs. The other outcome of the study was to propose from a study in Texas that the state of Texas felt that use of a PDD at 7% was excessive. The city is using it almost 90% of the time. It is your primary use on commercial development in terms of setting standards, and the problem is that it allows you to waive the standards. But my primary concern with the PDD is that you have failed in the city at this point to determine what kind of charter city you want to be. And this, if anything, needs to be addressed. Is this city proposing to go on without having the general plan and its standards and its policies and its programs, the primary thrust that you're accountable to on a planning decision? And I hope that that is the change that you take into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Track. Marvin Roos will be our last speaker, unless someone else puts in a card.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Marvin Roos. Little background, I spent a few years here, started with PD number 10. We are now close to PD 400. I processed several hundred of those on the staff, and I've processed a few since I've been a consultant. I agreed to do this. In fact, I wanted to do this because I think there's a lot of misinformation about the Planned Development District and its uses and abuses. I found that, and Judy did a marvelous job of constructing what has been modified over the years with PDDs. And it hasn't been the general plan that's been modified. It's been zoning that's been modified. Now, there are a couple of examples that we could probably have a further discussion on, but we heard for years that there was massive increases in density through the PDD. The only increase in density that was in Judy's study that I had to look into was the Palm Hotel, which was turned out to be a density transfer from the Winters property. Other than that, almost all of the projects are well under density, and part of that is because the land uses that developers have been trying to do we're out of R1 zoning. So part of we need to look at the zoning map, we need to look at the zoning ordinance, we need to look at the general plan map, and so all of it comes together. But Palm Springs is not turning into Palm Desert or Orange County or Santa Clarita. It's turning into Palm Springs, and it's marvelous. It's wonderful. If I could have told the council 25 years ago when I left here, things are going to be really great here in 25 years, they would have breathed a sigh of relief. And I think the council has stuck with it. I think the projects are good. Not that I like them all, but I think it's been a good process, and it'll be a good process for a long time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Roos. Okay, seeing no other requests to speak, Ms. Hart, no other questions, no other requests?
No, sir.
That closes our public comments. The next item is discuss the recommendations of the Ad Hoc PDD Committee. And I met with Chairman Wermick of the Planning Commission, and we discussed, and also we had the subcommittee meeting, and Councilmember Mills and I, we decided we would, as Director Fagg said, we would take these in the 4 different groupings and discuss them as a group. Kathy and I discussed that we don't have our little computer things, but I'll keep swiveling my head, and if someone wants to speak, just indicate some, and I'll recognize, that way I'll keep people from speaking at the same time. So the first area is suggested changes to the PDD ordinance. Who'd like to speak first on this?
I think what we had said was that I would speak a little bit about what we did
Oh,
with
true,
Planning
okay.
Commission and the subcommittee. If you look at 1 through 9 on the discussion points, I think that the subcommittee and Planning Commission thought that the PDD is a valuable tool. It allows the city to do some interesting projects that we might not otherwise be able to do, and not change the zoning unless the project gets built. It's got some advantages in terms of some of the technicalities of the PDD process itself. But the concern really was that the way it has been used in at least, I think, the time I've been on the Planning Commission, which is 5 years, it has created issues. And that as we look through 10 through, is it 25, there were several major issues that happened. A sense from the community that it's overused, that it's resulted in denser projects, which isn't actually true, but it's resulted in projects with less open space. So the definition of open space, the open space requirements were an issue. The difficulty in ascertaining from what's in the statute a way of dealing with community benefits for the trades. The fact that the trades as they came through were not small mitigations, but were major, in many instances, major waivers of our zoning process without a way to rectify that. Those were some of the issues that got raised as for the Planning Commission and were also raised in the PDD subcommittee. So that's where the recommendations come from. I know a couple members of our commission wanted to speak, if that's okay, on 2 of the items. Commissioner Donenfeld wanted to speak a little bit about our experience, and Commissioner Middleton wanted to speak on the community benefit process as we go through the first set of those, if that's okay for the 2 of them to speak first.
Sure,
and then
please, go ahead. You guys have been doing all the work.
Thank you very much. I'm going to be very brief here, but I think probably I have more years on the Planning Commission than anyone sitting here because I'm in my 3rd term. When I first joined the Planning Commission, we were in the throes of a very difficult economy, and Palm Springs was seeing very little development, particularly in residential development. And we were so anxious to see development come back on board for the city. And when development started to come back slowly but surely, we seemed to go to the default position of using the PDD. We didn't really question the merits of whether the PDD for each and every residential development was appropriate. It seemed to be the way to go and the way to encourage developers who were leading the way, because we wanted to bring developers to the table to do developments in Palm Springs. We wanted to get them, we wanted to be back in play again in terms of our city. So I think we used the PDD times very judiciously and very appropriately, but I think there were times when we, in the spirit of wanting to help the developer and move the project along and get it going and get it underway, we allowed a lot of our design guidelines and standards, density issues regarding the general plan and the attention we pay to that, the categories of use that is in the plan. The zoning code itself was proving to be more and more inadequate because it wasn't keeping pace with the modernity and the changes in the community and the industry. So we became more and more reliant on the PDD. And as we are now looking at plans that we've approved, we become less and less, more and more disenchanted with using the PDD in its current form, because what we're getting now is we're getting postage stamp developments, which are not really in keeping with Palm Springs. We're not integrating neighborhoods anymore. We're not looking at the general plan in terms of the context of what kind of an overall community we want with these developments. And so I think what the Ad Hoc Committee has done and what our citizens have helped us do is think more critically about this, knowing that the PDD is always a useful tool in our toolbox. But if we do a better job with tweaking and reforming our code, our zoning code, pay more attention to our our general plan and do some changes to the plan, which also are in order, I think, after 10 years, we will get a better mix of projects and we'll be able to educate the developer community to the fact that it can't be the way it's been for the last 5 or 6 years, that you can't just slap together a PDD, make some tweaks to it, and expect it to work. Because I think if we do that, we will lose the sense of our community eventually. And we're seeing it starting to erode, but I think it's not too late to bring it back and right the ship, and that's the way we feel.
Okay, Commissioner Middleton.
Okay. I've been on the Planning Commission for 3 years, and one of the issues that I think we have struggled with during my time, and as I talk to people who've been on longer, has been the issue of public benefits. The premise behind the public benefit provision is that there will be some public improvement that's commensurate with the variance from the development standards, and that we can identify what that public benefit is going to be and somehow or another make it even to what it is that we're that we're deviating from in terms of the standards. But we've never defined what a public benefit is, and we consistently struggle to evaluate the value of the public benefit and to calculate the value of what it is that the deviation is worth. Very few of us, and when I talk to people in the public, almost no one, can identify a meaningful public benefit that has resulted from the PDDs. We think there's a better way. The city has identified as a goal increasing working family affordable housing. The courts have identified that where you can find a nexus for affordable housing, that can be a legitimate cost to developers. We should move to a standardized approach for public benefits where developers using PDDs are required either to provide a percentage of housing to be affordably built and priced for working families, or in the alternative, a percentage fee charged against the value of the construction permit that would ultimately be used to support nonprofit organizations building working family affordable housing in Palm Springs. Such an approach standardizes the public benefit calculation and will result in increased affordable housing for Palm Springs workers to be able to live in Palm Springs.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Middleton. Chairman Wermick, do you have anyone else on the Planning Commission who'd like to speak at this time?
If there is another member, Commissioner Hirschbein.
Yeah, I'd just like to add a little bit to an issue that you brought up at the beginning, Commissioner Warmick, about density versus open space. And it's a discussion I had as recently as this morning with the planning director. And a lot of the projects we're seeing being approved or brought forward to us on PDDs are small lot subdivisions. And the density, which is units per acre, is relatively low based on the zoning code for those particular parcels. But what gets distorted is the idea of density, and it's really more about quote-unquote open space and how that's defined. And so as we move through with the PDD recommendations, I hope we take some consideration as defining open space as common open space that's not walled off into little courtyards, but contributes to the overall landscape and visual quality of the entire community, not just the development itself, but from the public right-of-ways as well. If you look at some of our denser projects that could be 2- or 3-story apartment buildings, the way they're set back from the streets and allow these gracious landscape buffers to contribute to our environment is a positive, and you don't see that in a lot of these small lot subdivisions, even though their density, quote-unquote density, is lower. So I think we should be taking a hard look at how we define open space so we really can contribute to what our community looks like in the end.
The other comment I would make is that the great majority of the PDs we've gotten involve small lots, and the ordinance itself actually speaks to mixed use. And so that's a finding we haven't been making but haven't had to make. And one of the thoughts we had, or the subcommittee, the ad hoc committee had, is that because we haven't kept our zoning ordinances up with the innovations in the industry, that this is the only permit that's available, and that if and we'll get more into that in zoning, but if we created the kinds of permits we needed, we would have standards, good standards for the small lot requests that we're getting, and they wouldn't all have to go through the PD, and then the PD could be used for the innovative projects it was intended to go towards. I want to say that we were not asked in the ad hoc committee to rewrite the PD ordinance. That's something that we didn't do, and we didn't do a thorough critique of that ordinance. The ordinance itself could be quite good, but it's the use and the overuse that has created some of the issues that we're bringing forward to you. The other area that I think when you're doing, especially if you're doing small residential and you're doing it through a PD process, you miss standards, so that if you remember to have a standard in one development, but the person who really pushed that standard isn't at the next meeting and you don't catch it, you actually don't have cohesive standards through your small developments across the city. And you may, we had to have small changes to allow people to do some, I think it was shading at the Morrison. They shouldn't have to come back to us because the PD didn't allow it. We should have standards that allow those kinds of things. So that's part of what we're looking at in this ordinance is eventually we want to identify what standards can be changed, what things have to be kept, and to move some of the issues that could be done through zoning into new zoning that is appropriate. Randy.
I'd like to go back to the public benefit issue as well. I totally support what Commissioner Middleton has expressed, but it's in some ways a bigger issue because I don't think that the applicants understand public benefit either, because we never really have required them to provide what I think is any significant public benefit, because I don't know that we understand what our abilities are in that regard. I don't expect the City Council to give us a list of A through Z. These are acceptable public benefits, but it would really be helpful if we had, I think, a bigger discussion and maybe even some kind of position paper in terms of what is appropriate for public benefit in the city. We should be getting much more public benefit out of the projects that we're approving than we have at this point. And that doesn't mean a small park, I don't think, in a project that's being built, which is actually a public benefit to that development itself. But what's the public benefit to the city? What's the public benefit to the population of this community? And that's a very, very different question than the kind of public benefits that we've been discussing in the past. Thank you.
Also, item 23 was one of the most important things that came out of the subcommittee, which is not treating the standards as waivers but minor modifications, and clearly identifying where there's a modification of existing standards. So that from the subcommittee point of view, and I think it was Scott Bigsby that raised that issue, was one of the things the ad hoc subcommittee thought was most important.
Any comments at this time from the Planning Commission, Chairman Wermick?
I don't think there are any. We've talked a lot.
Yeah, no, it's fine. You talk, we're listening, because I know you guys have been through a lot of meetings yourself on this. So any comments from the City Council?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think I have I think what came out of ad hoc, I think probably made a lot of people realize that the PD, and I heard you say it, is not the devil's work, as as some people like to term it as, and it's a result of really a zoning ordinance that doesn't address every issue, because it just cannot. We have a 50-year-old zoning ordinance, 50 years old. It's the first one the city had, and it's the one that we still have, with some minor modifications that have been done, and minor is very minor. And I think the recommendations that I saw that I certainly support, and that I hope that we get them in our budget, because they're not in our budget now, is our general plan update, which is way overdue. And with that general plan update, and it mentions it in here somewhat, is the coordination of the general plan and the zoning ordinance. And it causes conflict and forces PDs. And I talked to Flynn earlier about it. I mean, I think they need to be done at the same time, or at least by the same consultant. And if we're going to put an RFP out like we normally do for this type of work, we should make it for both, so there's follow through with whoever that consultant is. Because everybody talks about the zoning ordinance being in conformity with the general plan, and it isn't. And the projects and the property that we're seeing now are, again, as I said, are forcing the PD process, because there's no other way to get there. But I was very happy to hear the mention that the PD is a good tool, and we should keep it, because you're never gonna get everything right in the zoning ordinance, and you're never gonna get everything right in the general plan. But it should not be, there are instances where it should be used and shouldn't be used. I really liked in the justification portion of the ad hoc committee about talking about when the application is submitted, get into the detail of why you're choosing the PD method, and how your public benefits are outlined, but more into why are you using that tool. And I think staff plays a very important role in guiding a developer on that path. If they don't need to do the PD, well, then staff should be able to advise them as to that. But it really comes down to, I think, our zoning ordinance. There was talk of open space. The PD process very plainly states that you cannot reduce open space. It's the same as whatever is the underlying zone. It states that. Yet the difference is, and I think probably the small lot has been the thing, is it's treated differently. It's kind of walled in open space. And so the definition of common open space, as Michael said, versus public open space, or more of a community open space, even if it's internal in the project, is probably something that needs to be looked at. Exactly how you do it, I don't know. But through the general plan process and this zoning modification process, I think we can definitely get there. It is not going to be an easy process. It is not going to be a short process. It has a couple years written all over it. So but I was very much encouraged by the document. I think one of the other things about PDs, it's our most flexible process from allowing things to be reduced to also allowing them to be more stringent. And it's all in how do you do it. So how Planning Commission, how City Council, do you look at these projects and say, I mean, these projects are approved projects. They're gone through the process. They've gone through what we've told them to do. If you don't like the result, then it needs to be taken care of during that process. But just because somebody submits, at least the way I look at it, just because somebody submits a PD, in my mind, that project has got to be, I've got the flexibility to make it a better project than it would have been had it been built exactly per right of zone, and that's what I strive for. I tried, you know, I overrule you guys, not a lot, but I do from time to time, and I get into things that to me are things that should be reflected in quality projects and have had a lot of time to be worked on, whether it's AAC, whether it's you, but I don't like overruling you guys. I really don't. I've sat out there for 10 years in the same seat you're sitting at, and I don't like it. But I can't consciously let it go through, knowing that it can be a better project. So so kind of the blame is on all of us that approve these projects for letting them go as far as they go for whatever reason. The PD, the developer of a PD essentially gives up his rights when he's the PD, and he's subject to new rights. And it's up to us to tell him what we want and how we want it, and let them understand that. And so, and to end up with a better project than you would have in the first place. So I think I think, as JR mentioned, there is some low-hanging fruit. I think the application is a really easy one to go in and modify and get the true understanding of why the developer is going to the process as well. And I think the outlines of what were suggested, how staff look at it as well, is very important, because you are not all planners and you're not all architects, but you need to see what the variations from what the zoning are, and I think, to Flynn's credit and his staff's credit, the reports have gotten better that way, and so I think that's what we should be able to get to. I certainly hope no one looks at getting rid of the PD process because we need something to get us through the next 2 years or so, whatever it takes to get this fixed. But I hope we look at it on a project-by-project basis with a different attitude. And I think Kathy's statement was right. If you look at the PDs we've had, it's because our zoning ordinance doesn't conform to what the product is. That's the market is that's the active product in the market. And I'm one for. I mean, we need to address that in our zoning ordinance. So I thought again I was listening to a lot of the things over the years that I've been sitting here about how bad the PD process is and how our town's going to hell because of our PD process and this and this and that and this and that. And I don't think that's true. And if it is, it's because of us allowing it to be that way, because you have more control on a PD than you do any other project. And so I think I'm going to encourage my colleagues to get the general plan update in this year's budget, because it's not right now, and at least I don't think it is. And because I think it's something that is long overdue and really does need to be dealt with as fast as we can. So thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councilmember Roberts?
Yeah, I'd like to get us into a direction. I concur with much of what Councilman Mills said. You know, some want to make the PDD a four-letter word, and it simply isn't. It is how we've used it. It's also been deformed, not because it was anybody's intention. It was deformed partially because of it was a market-driven issue, and that developers were coming in for lower density, but separating. So in other words, rather than the many more attached units they could have had, they traded those in for single-family houses on postage stamp lots and in vertical houses. Well, they didn't do that because they thought it was a great idea. They did it because people want them. And to this moment, as we speak, they can't be built fast enough. And they're sold immediately. And some of these places are selling out before they're even built now. So to me, sometimes the booby prize is trying to understand how you got to a certain place. There are many factors that contributed to that. And society, the market, and the economy can drive a lot of that. Because prior to 10 years ago, PDDs were not a problem. Mr. Donenfeld, I think, laid out a great history on it. I can remember when I was on the Planning Commission, and the first time I turned to a developer and said, "Where's your public benefit?" Kathy will remember this. He flipped out on me and started screaming at me and said, "I've never heard about this." So what happened was there was a major shift. And we're like a cruise ship. You know, we're moving in a direction, and all of a sudden we decide we're going the wrong way, and now we have to turn the cruise ship. And it doesn't happen like a speedboat. So I agree with you that it's time to accept that it's time to get moving on the general plan. I don't think our zoning is a nightmare. I loved hearing that our zoning was 50 years old, because a lot of what's been developed in the last 15 years is great. And many things that were created by PDD are nice projects. Some are not so nice. The city is not ruined by any stretch of the imagination. I think that where I'd like to see us go with this is, as I mentioned earlier, I think there's probably half of this are things that we can use immediately, that can go into a form that is handed to developers, and basically a developer would be handed a kit that he would have to fill out or she would have to fill out and justify their reason for doing this. And if their justifications don't work, then the PDD, they simply don't make it. They simply don't make it, as I said earlier. They may not even go on to the Planning Commission. That can be denied. You have not justified your reason for a PDD. As I mentioned earlier, the rest of it requires standards. Each recommendation requires some new standards. Public benefit, which has been brought up a number of times, is, again, it's a standard. We need a list, the type of public benefits, what level we want to go to. And I guess what I'd like to see happen here is these guys have all done an amazing job. We're taking it in and absorbing it. I guess, and Flynn, argue with me, but what I want to suggest is that we send this to you and to your staff to maybe break it down into two lists. Things that we can implement now, things that can, particularly the justification aspects of it, that we could institute immediately, because we could put them into a form that's handed to developers, which instantly gives the Planning Commission some of the standards that they need for justification. Then make a second list of standards, of things that needed to be developed. And then I'd like to see your recommendations on who should do that. Should we keep the subcommittee in place if they're willing to stay in place and start to build some of these standards? Do we want to hand some of them to the Planning Commission to work on? But this is a pretty big thing we're trying to attack. And I think we've got all these intelligent people here who, some of them may want to run out of the room right now, but they're very familiar with it now. And I don't think we should give up this pool of skill and knowledge if they're willing to now start attacking the very pieces of it that they put into the recommendation. So that would be my recommendation on how to move forward to the council.
Mayor Pro Tem, anything?
No, I'm just fascinated by the conversation because it's been something that since I've been on this council, and I've been on for almost 14 years now, and it's I remember being on the council in the beginning and making a statement that I'd never vote for anything that was under 6,000 square foot lot. And I was just thinking, whatever happened to that vow that I made? And I thought about it often as things have come through, because they didn't come through in less than that before. And I've thought a lot about the ideology of a public benefit, and I've never thought about it as a list. I thought about it more as an ideology. And I think we can accomplish that by making a list of questions and having significant answers to them. How does this benefit the city? How does it benefit the citizens? How does it benefit the residents of the project? How is it a visual benefit? How is it a recreational benefit? How is it a health benefit? Because you can't, because it seems to be, and I think I said this a couple of weeks ago when we had a project, that the public benefit du jour is a dog park. Oh, I'll add a dog park, and that's the public benefit.
Not a bad one.
Pardon me?
It's not a bad one.
No, it's not a bad one, but it can't. How many? Every project has a postage stamp dog park. Is not exactly what I consider a public benefit. So I really appreciate the work that's been done, and I think I like your idea, Councilmember Roberts. Because when I looked at this list, I tried to think of, okay, and that's what was the impetus for my first question, was how does this get implemented? Because there are things in here that we could do like right now, but the list is not broken up that way. And so I would second your whole evaluation of how to proceed.
Go ahead.
Yeah, first, I just also want to echo my appreciation. This was really useful. This whole report was really useful, and I really appreciate all the recommendations. I agree we need to figure out what we can do short-term, what we need to do long-term. But I just, for me, and I don't think a PDD is a dirty word, but things, the market does drive things. But one of the reasons we have rules is so we don't let the market drive things. Otherwise, we end up with projects that people may want to buy, but not that we may want for our city, and in places. And a deformed process, right? And not in places we want them. So, when we do these, I won't call them tiny houses, but the small lot developments, right, we do lose the open space, I think, as we're all talking about, but we also lose what we initially wanted to be greater density, because that's how we get more affordable housing. And so there are other consequences to doing that, and it is why I sort of do like Commissioner Middleton, and I think Commissioner Lowe weighed in, the idea that at least when we're losing density, to get affordable housing out of it, because I think that does tie it together and is something that we're losing in the process. And so, it's gone from being something that's used occasionally because of the way the zoning is and the way the lot is, to something that's the majority, and I think this is all designed to flip it back. And so I think that's a good thing, and I think it's the way we need to go. And I think some of it is going to take a long time, and some of it isn't, and I think that's a really smart way to start getting it going.
There's been a lot said, and I agree with virtually everything that's been said so far, but just a couple of things. Chris, you said the zoning ordinance is 50 years old? I didn't realize that. 65, wow. Well, from my understanding, the zoning ordinance is built on the general plan, and our general plan is 10 years old, and the zoning ordinance is 50 years old. No wonder we have this patchwork where they don't really have the combination. So your suggestion of trying to fund and do a update or a new zoning plan and a general plan at the same time would be cost effective. Dr. Reddy, is that a practical process to try to do them at the same time, perhaps by the same contractor? Would it save money, or would it be effective?
Bad news now about how much that's
Yeah, I know,
cost.
it costs a lot. About as much as the Buzz does every year.
What I think would probably be.
Per year.
Well, clearly there's a high price tag to this, and there's a significant amount of work, but that's why, you know, the cost is there because you're going to get a lot of assistance. But that being said, I think this is one of those cases where, even though if we may not have the money to do it right now, we certainly start planning for it so we can articulate when we will be doing it. But there's some informal work that would be very helpful now, whether it's the continued discussion with the Planning Commission or the other groups and stakeholders in this dialogue with council, and we just need to formalize that in some way to keep this dialogue going, and then be able to come back to you and articulate a plan and a budget to get you ultimately where you want to be. But as Councilmember Mills said, it is going to be at least a 2-year adventure.
Well, we'll be working on the next budget in 9 or 10 months. In fact, I'm sure you started working on next year's budget already. But I would sort of like to ask if you would start looking into get some estimates of, can you get some estimates of what this would cost and start working on a proposed budget so we could actually consider that when we do the budget next year, because it's hard for us to just block out. It'd be good if we had a range of costs that we could plan on and try to block out as a priority in our next budget.
Well, the planning director certainly can, I think, in a September timeframe, certainly outline for the council what he thinks that process should be.
Okay, Councilmember Mills.
I was just going to say, Mr. Mayor, I think next year's budget's too late. I think if we as a group agree that the general plan needs to be brought forward, we need to do it, and Mr. Reddy will find the money. And that's part of his job.
Once again, the wizard behind the curtain is being called up.
Well, if I would do that, the other way to look at this is, remember, the ultimate criterion for evaluating any public policy is if it improves the value of community life. And if the council is saying this is what is the important function we have to do to improve the quality of life, then the model you need to think about is if you're going to do it now, you take half of it from your fund balance, half of it from your Measure J, because there's a lot of symmetry between the two funds, and you do it now. I mean, that's the other model, where you just bypass everything and just do it as a priority.
Well, perhaps we should ask Dr. Reddy, because we're working with, Jeff and I are working with Dr. Reddy now to try to find some recommendations to the full council on a $3.5 million budget cut to put towards our pension fund. And perhaps could we integrate this into it, or we could try to identify at least enough money to get this started?
So I agree that we should get this started. I think waiting a year for something we know we need to do, it's not like the money's all of a sudden going to fall out of the sky and we're going to have it. So if we know we have to do it, we have to do it, and we might as well get it started because it is so important. So I think this is something that, as the mayor just said, we are working as a budget subcommittee. We have a budget because we wanted to pass one, and we did a lot of work on it, but we knew we'd have to be coming back, right? We're looking at cuts. We're looking next week. We're talking about some revenue generation for some specific things. And so, what we've been talking about is in September sort of coming back with, if we do have revenue generation, what the priorities are and how that money will be spent, so the public knows what happens if that revenue generation gets passed and what happens if it doesn't. And so in that work, we can add in figuring out, and maybe your answer is right, on how we do it, but figuring out how we find the money to do this, if that's what the majority council wants to do. But we still have more work on the budget, right, that we know we have coming. So we can meet with you and really put this in if the majority council thinks we need to get started, which I'm getting the sense we do.
I think we've got some ideas of where to find some of
Yeah,
this.
no, and we do,
Yeah.
and we've talked about ideas for cuts already. So, budgets are all about priorities, right? What is the most important things that we think need to happen? And this has to be high up on the list.
Councilman Roberts?
I just want to say I get a little bit concerned at moments like this. So I will reveal that while we are examining the position of the city manager right now and putting him through his annual review, one of the things we asked of him was to talk to us about the bandwidth that is available for the staffing that we have and his time and his abilities. And we have to be careful when we sit up here in a moment of excitement and lay down some other huge goal. What I hear on this table right now is an agenda development idea. Yes, it's a goal. Yes, it's something we need to focus on. But we also need to be very clear, and I'm not right now, on what our goal list is over the next 3 to 5 years. And this is adding a gigantic weight on top of a pile that we've already handed to them. So we're here tonight to talk about PDDs, and I'd love us to get to a direction on that right now. And then what I would like to see is this be the concept of the start, because as you point out, Chris, this is a minimum 2 or 3 year process for the general plan. Let's agendize that for the next few months to start that process. But can we put the PDD to bed right now? And when I say to bed, to start to implement it and to keep that train on track so that it can actually find a station and we can start using it immediately. Because if the PDD gets weighted back into zoning or back into the general plan, we're not going to see any result on it for years. And what I love about what you've all done here is so much of this could be implemented immediately, and this can be a separate track. And I based on all the people in this room and the agreement on this, this is important. This we can do now, and let's do it. This won't take 2 years. We can implement this entire thing relatively quickly, and half of it immediately. And that's what I'd like to see us focus on tonight.
Can we let
just to,
Adjourn.
and maybe, I know you're going through a discussion, but we've only gone through one of the 4 points.
I know.
So I just wanted to make sure
I know.
that
I was thinking the same thing.
We're not
in a hurry, but I just wanted I was wondering if you thought that if we finish the discussion on this, or if we're abandoning 26 through 67.
No.
I don't think we're abandoning anything.
No, I think the general consensus here is these are good suggestions, and I think the other consensus is that we need to look and see which ones we can implement without a lot of work, just by changing some policies. Director Fegg?
Mr. Mayor, if I might interject, Councilman Roberts makes a good point in terms of providing information to you in terms of what things are short-term items that we could implement versus what are long-term, and then going into detail in terms of how it's done and who should do it. What I might recommend to you is that when we come back to this topic in September, which I hope we will, that staff will bring forward a list to you identifying what are the short-term items that could be implemented right away, and then what are the longer-term items, and then how we go about doing that. I think that would help you to make decisions. But one of the things that would help me this evening is that if I'm going to go through that exercise, it would be nice to know, are there any of the recommendations here that you are not interested in pursuing? And as Chair Wormuck brings up, we've only gone through 1 through 25. If we could maybe get through the rest of the list, that would identify for me which ones you're not interested in pursuing, so I don't waste my time trying to come up with ways to implement that.
Just do them all.
Should
Also, the subcommittee, I'd like to get more input from the subcommittee on that subject exactly. As you two have pondered this, are there areas in it that you want to point out to us that you don't think will necessarily benefit us or the look of a future PDD document or ordinance?
I would like to, and I don't know whether we're going to take this in order, but the ones that are in red, I kind of have some questions about why they were not forwarded or why they weren't the majority report. And so I think we can do that if we take them by, if we're going to take them by groups. So if we...
Was that the case, or is that just the Planning Commission's changes to what the subcommittee recommended is red, isn't it?
The only ones that weren't majority had to do with gates where there were 2 dissenting opinions. Those are the planning commissioners who didn't agree with number 45, and then 2 items where Lynn Callardine had a different position than the majority. So although I think he might not have held on. So there were three places where the two planning commissioners.
Yeah, no, I
dissented.
know, you're explaining to me what I know. I'm just asking, I had wanted a little more information. Why this was not, why the suggestion was, let's say for Lynn's suggestion, what was the reasoning that it wasn't forwarded to the city council?
Oh, no, everything was forwarded to you. We forwarded everything to you that came from the subcommittee. Items that are in red.
No, I know, yeah, but it says under recommendations, do not forward to city council. The recommendations reflect the same time frame as the recent extension of time ordinance. And so that's why I wanted to know why that was.
And that's item recommendation number 36.
And the reason that was that the Planning Commission had gone through a lengthy ordinance we forwarded to the city council that recommended a 2-year extension time period with significant conditions as what would merit an extension, and what the Planning Commission recommended was that for PDs the same extension criteria and timelines be extended to PDs that were extended to other permits and that you approved, and the ad hoc committee saw this before the Planning Commission made those recommendations and forwarded them to council, and council adopted them. So in that instance, the reason the Planning Commission changed that recommendation was to have it meet what was a more stringent requirement that had come from Planning Commission and then council had adopted in terms of extensions.
Okay.
And so the recommendation, I believe, was up to a 2-year extension as opposed to 3, because that we wanted a uniform standard.
Okay.
So that.
It didn't say that in here, that's why I.
Yeah, and no, it
curious.
was mainly that the council has already adopted something, and we thought that this should conform to that same standard as to the extensions that you adopted.
Okay, thank you.
So I think where we are now, we're asking staff to go through these and tell us which ones can be done fairly easily without a lot of work and by just changing applications, et cetera, and which ones are high value. There's high value, low effort, and then low value, high effort. So we want to divide those.
Can we still go finish this, though? I mean,
Absolutely,
I think.
yes. I'm trying to close the chapter on section 1.
Oh, okay, if we're on section 1.
Done. Okay, I had some more comments, but I'll save them. Next one is suggested changes to the PDD, to the
process.
General
The
PDD process, yes.
And these came from pretty much Planning Commission experience. One was to have a study session early on. We tend to have that anyway. It's not now a requirement, but they are usually complex. They don't fit into a zoning code, and some original time with the applicant is always fruitful, so to put that into the process. We also wanted justifications. We wanted a stronger staff response, or the ad hoc committee, a stronger staff response saying, this works, this doesn't work. We're not going to recommend it if it goes in the way it looks. And then it's to have findings. Right now, the findings on PDs reflect only major architectural and the CUP findings, but there are no specific findings to PDs that they match the general plan. And we think that the set of findings for PDs should be thought through, and that with PDs, the findings should explain each of the variances from zonings and the reason that those were given. So it's more of an explanation, more of a process, so that it's clearer why something went through and was approved. And the other was that what we have found is that with the PD going to architectural advisory first, they're looking at architecture on land uses that haven't been approved. And therefore we get confused. We either get them saying there's not enough parking, it looks too high. They're going into planning issues, which is understandable because they're getting something that really hasn't been evaluated. And so we think that it should go to Planning Commission first for land use issues, and then to architectural, and then if required, back to Planning Commission for final approval of the architectural advisory conditions. But that extra step, so those were, this is in some sense, this is, I think, low-hanging fruit because it changes the process and makes it match what we really need for a process so that we don't end up with a confused applicant and a confused commission and a confused AAC.
So are you're specifically suggesting that maybe we flip the process in terms of who sees it first?
Yes.
Mr. Mayor, if I can comment on that, because that's, to me, that's in conflict with what item number 26 is. Number 26 is all PDs should go to a study session of Planning Commission prior, whenever they're ready, but they go to a study session first. That's when you as a Planning Commission would comment on this seems okay, this doesn't seem okay. You're not voting, but you're looking at it, and with the staff report that outlines where the differences are in the PD, and informally, because you're not voting, say there's a consensus, of what the issues are. And then at that point, I would think it would go to architectural review and then back to you after that. And the reason I say that is that what your comments are could affect what the architectural design is. And a lot of times, if you just look at it from a plan standpoint, not even getting in the architecture, where you're just dealing with planning and if they want to put the architecture in, that's fine, but you don't need it from a planning standpoint, I don't think. But that process, I think, works. Mr. Coors, you're shaking your head, but okay. All right.
Well, I think we have.
Oh, I knew it was something important.
It was not you, I promise.
Yeah, so, I think we had both recommendations in there, because the document we were forwarding this, but the either of those work. Right now, we get it after AAC has looked at it.
And we had considerable discussion on that particular.
And we had, yeah. So if you want to,
we had considerable discussion on who should go first. And in my view, any timeline you come up with is going to have pros and cons depending on which one goes first.
Yeah,
I'm probably with Commissioner Mills here. I've got a red line because I like the current process, but I think I was overruled by everybody else.
Not to bring up the old days, but in the old days, any PD always used to go to a study session at Planning Commission before it processed anywhere else.
That was because they didn't have computers then.
Yeah, well, that's true. We didn't have computers then, or good ones anyway.
We've been doing that.
But that concept is good for the applicant, and to let him know if he's got issues and give him an opportunity to fix them or to move on. So, but I don't like going to just having the you guys act on the land part, because I think it affects the architecture. So that's my thought on that.
That concept, by the way, number 26, makes you filter number 2, and I think that's a great idea. If it passes through staff's filter, and I think very often they're not sure if it's adhering relatively well to zoning, which may or may not be perfect, it's their job pretty much, because of land rights, to move it forward. So it puts you all in filter 2 position, which is, to me, the most important place at that point, because you will decide whether it comes back to you or not, or whether it goes to the AAC or not, or where it goes. But it's almost as if you solved the point you brought up, Kathy, with number 26.
Yeah,
You're bringing it right back.
I think either of those could work, either a formal planning commission first or a study session first, but seeing it before it moves forward and seeing it early is important, before the applicant has spent a lot of time on architecture and has locked in a design they don't want to change.
You make a very compelling argument about planning issues being addressed before the design aesthetics, because you're right, and I remember that happened very often, where people were given direction on paint color and landscaping, and then we'd turn around and knock the building down, or move it, or reduce the number of units, and I remember developers pulling their hair out, and I understood it. And we actually benefit the developer by perhaps doing what Kathy's recommending.
Well, I was going to ask Chairman Wermick, is there anyone else on the Planning Commission who'd like to comment on this section?
Commissioner Donenfeld.
I just want to agree with Councilman Mills in that we for a long time were doing study sessions on PDDs and major developments. The more we do them, the more we realize how essential they are in the process, because you have a give and take in a study session with a developer that you don't have in a formal planning commission meeting. Yeah. And you can really guide the developer before he or she is too far down the path in terms of development with respect to our thoughts. So if you feel strongly that AAC should see it before planning makes a final decision on it and it goes back, I think the study session is a way for us to get our oar in the water at the beginning, so the developer knows how we feel about certain major items, and he can go forth and tweak those items before he even gets to AAC. So I think doing a study session ought to be part of the process.
Yeah. I'm going to step in and agree with that. I don't know that we have had a study session that we haven't come up with a better product. It's a much more two-way conversation. We have time to take some serious look at the project itself, whereas in a planning commission meeting, we just don't have the detail or the time to do that. The study sessions are extremely productive.
So any other discussion on this? I guess this section is sort of like the first one. I asked the staff to look at the high-value, low-effort items, and that could be done soon, and then we'll look further later on the more higher effort items. Okay, next section is we're going to suggest changes to the general plan.
On the general plan, I think the first thing I wanted to say is that we all thought that we needed a general plan update along with revisions and looks at the zoning code, that was something that the commission has had concerns about. We actually asked for a long-range planner a couple of years ago to the old city council because we were concerned that there are planning issues that you can't get to if you're just doing servicing the counter and servicing the day-to-day. So a lot of the PD issues involve the general plan. Areas for small lot development, whether or not small lot development can fit into the 7,000 square foot sort of not so smaller residential developments. I think there are 18 areas in the general plan where a PD is recommended as the way to do something, and that seems like it's too much. It was too much. And all of those areas that the PD has mentioned should be reviewed to see if another kind of permit could be used, if a CUP could be used some places. there were other items like gated communities and, which is and that's one where the two planning commissioners felt that the general plan now currently mandates no gates unless there's a firm justification for them.
A long and controversial item.
It's a long, and the rest of the subcommittee would have been more generous than we were. We need to look at thresholds, the lowest thresholds of the higher density residential because of the lawsuit. We need to define mixed use. We need more definitions of open space. We have to establish goals, and some of these things don't have to do with PDs, except they came as PDs. Goals and policies for the reuse and redevelopment of golf courses. We're going to be seeing more of those. We've already seen one without standards that came out of the general plan because it wasn't anticipated, although it should be anticipated. So there, we found that the general plan was involved with the PD issue in lots of ways, and there were things that needed to be looked at. This could almost be combined with the zoning issue and do it at the same time so that we don't hold people up. But the other thing is that our zoning process is out of date. I mean, we have a high-rise ordinance that sometimes comes into PDs that's a suburban ordinance that doesn't really fit urban planning. That needs a look at in the zoning ordinance. We need to determine whether or not we want a small lot ordinance and then where to put it. That's a zoning issue. The open space issue comes up here again. There are no permits for mixed use and multi-use. You can't get a permit to do a mixed use building without going through a PD. And maybe on this, bringing the zoning code up to date, Lynn can, since he's our consultant on board and he has been talking about this for 5 years, he could.
Yeah, since I've been on the commission for 6 years now, I think I've been reiterating that we've got to bring the zoning ordinance up to date. I mean, the zoning ordinance should be subservient to the general plan. We updated the general plan, as people have said, back in 2007. And there are both land uses and policies all throughout that general plan. They're not reflected in the zoning. And the only way we can amend that to prove a project, since it has to be both consistent with the zoning and the general plan, is to have a PDD amend the zoning. We should not have PDDs amending the general plan. That's another subject. But it really is, it gets to be, because a lot of the lots that we have in town that are left to develop are along our commercial corridors. Some of those areas, most of our single-family residential is built out. Those other than single-family residential, where we have a lot of conflicts in our own planning standards. And it becomes very difficult to say what is the setback supposed to be, because the zoning says one thing and the general plan says another. Now, if we were a general law city, our zoning would have to be consistent with the general plan. That's what the state legislature has said. But that doesn't apply to us from a charter city. But we still cannot approve a development that is inconsistent with the general plan. We got to get that fixed sometime soon. And I know it's a lot of money, but a lot of our problems come from that issue right there. They were internally inconsistent, to use the planner's term, between what the zoning says and the general plan says. And even a simple issue like gates, where the general plan text says we don't want any gates in some places. And I know several people on the council don't think that that's what it says. So there's a lot of issues that need to be resolved. The zoning doesn't even address gates, I don't think, in terms of where they're appropriate. So we just got to get a consistent process going.
Any other comments from the Planning Commission, Chairman Wermick, on general plan?
Are there others? General plan, and I think we went through to the end. We actually took you to 67. We've done the last two so that we don't have to go through, but those two are linked. And they're linked to PDs, and they're also linked to the fact that we're using the PD where we could be using other permits if we created ones that we know we need.
I think the bottom line here is, I think we're all in agreement the general plan and the zoning ordinance need to be redone and made consistent with each other and meet modern needs. I mean, there's things like IT infrastructure in the city that most new general plans have and ours doesn't. But I think this is where we have to, I know there's debate up here on this, but we have to ask the city manager to pencil out for us both your bandwidth to be able to do something like this, and also based on your bandwidth and what your schedule could accommodate for this. When I say you, I mean you and your staff, of how much funding would be needed. Then we'll have to try to find that funding to match whatever you come up with that you can do. Is that a good compromise on that?
Flynn, did you get your question answered? Because I think what I heard was that there isn't anything really here that's being rejected. So I think what you're going to probably need from us is when you break this up into things that we can implement immediately and then a list of things that we can then delegate or work on ourselves to fill out, that may be the time we'll look at that cut down list and decide if some of it can be combined or whether we just have to take each single piece and find ways of working on it. I mean, is that what you heard?
Yes, that's understandable. My next question for you was that once I do that exercise of going through the list, identifying, what's short term, what's long term, et cetera, should this go to the City Council subcommittee first before we bring it back to the City Council meeting?
I would suggest that.
Okay, so let's do this as our direction to staff this evening is I will go ahead and work on that assignment. I will schedule a meeting with the City Council subcommittee in September that we can review that document and work program. And once the City Council subcommittee is comfortable and feels that they have adequate information, we can bring that back to the entire City Council.
Councilmember Mills, would you be here in August?
Pardon me?
Are you going to be here in August?
Good answer.
I was going to say, Flynn, when you come back to the subcommittee, I really just think you need a list of low-hanging fruit, as JR said, and then the other stuff that's more. I don't think you need to do any more detail than that. And then let's get that list done, and then we'll figure out the work program to make that done. And I think that makes it then you don't have such a wasted or potentially wasted effort.
That's what I was suggesting, Chris, is that very clean, simple list, when we cut away the low-hanging fruit, would come back to you two to refine or take a look at.
And besides low-hanging fruit, I mean, as I mentioned a while ago, there's high-value, low-effort things. Then there's low-value, high-effort things, and we just need to organize them by what's the highest value for the most reasonable effort. Yep. Okay. Is that, we completed comments? Okay. Chairman Wermick, any more comments from your commission? Okay, well, first I want to thank all of the Planning Commission and all the committee and who worked on this so hard for 9 months, and I think we've got a good start here, and I think we're seeing some consensus here, and I think the first step in fixing a problem is recognizing you have one, and I think we've definitely recognized that we have one, and we have the commitment from both groups to fix it. So we move forward, and it's going to be a long and tedious and expensive process, but it has to be done. So. Okay, the next item is council member comments, requests, and reports. Anybody want to request a city council meeting tomorrow night? Hell, we're on a roll. So, any requests, reports? Seeing none, but ready to adjourn? We will adjourn. Thank you.